Box Collector.
Hello and welcome to Box Collector. My name is Shay Densley and I will be showing you how to play the 3 to 4 player game Catan, designed by Klaus Tuber and published by Cosmos. In Catan, you act as a settler who has just landed on the island of Catan. The only problem is so did 2 or 3 other settlers, and there is only so much land and resources to go around. Players compete for land and resources in order to build villages worth 1 point and cities worth 2 points. The first player to get 10 victory points wins. So let's go ahead and set up the game. We'll start by constructing the island. First, take the frame pieces and match them to the numbers at the ends of each frame piece. For your first game, it's recommended that you set up the 19 terrain hexes like this, which creates a well-balanced island for all the players. But in later games, you can set up the terrain hexes and number tokens randomly, or you can set up the number tokens in alphabetical order, starting in one corner and moving clockwise, skipping the desert, which you will place the robber on, until you've used all the numbered tokens. If you set up the number tokens randomly, make sure you keep the red numbers from being adjacent. So if I flipped the tokens like this, I could swap this 6 with this 4. Next, pick a color and place your 5 settlements, 4 cities, and 15 roads in front of you, as well as the building cost card that corresponds with your color. Place the longest road and largest army beside the board along with the 2 dice. Sort the 5 resources, lumber, brick, wool, grain, and ore into their respective piles. Lastly, shuffle the development cards and place them face down by the board. If you are a beginner, it's recommended that you start like this, with the locations of your first 2 settlements and roads already chosen for you. If you play a 3-player game, remove red. Blue will start with a lumber, ore, and brick card. White will start with grain, brick, and lumber. Orange will start with 2 grain and an ore. And red will start with 2 lumber and a grain. If you choose not to play this way, you will choose where to place your first 2 settlements and roads. First, each player will roll both dice. The player who rolls the highest number starts by placing a settlement on an unoccupied intersection and then a road adjacent to the settlement. The other players then follow clockwise. A settlement may only be built on an unoccupied intersection and only if none of the 3 adjacent intersections contains a settlement or city. Meaning, if I wanted to build a settlement, it has to be at least 2 paths away from the nearest settlement or city. A road may only be placed on an unoccupied path. Once everyone has placed 1 settlement and 1 adjoining road, the player who went last now places their second settlement and its adjacent road. The second settlement does not need to connect to the first settlement. The other players follow counterclockwise, so the starting player places their second settlement last. Each player receives their starting resources immediately after building their second settlement. For each terrain hex adjacent to this second settlement, take a corresponding resource card. Meaning if orange placed their second settlement here, they would get an ore and 2 grain. If this is your first time playing, the oldest player will go first. Otherwise, the player that rolled the highest number earlier will start. On your turn, you must first roll the 2 dice. The sum of the 2 dice corresponds to the hexes with that number. Anyone that has a settlement or city built on a hex with the corresponding number gets to take that resource. So for example, I rolled a 5. So blue and white get wool, and blue gets a brick. The only number not on the board is a 7. When a 7 is rolled, the player who rolled the 7 must move the robber to a new hex. You then steal one random resource card from one player who has a settlement or city built on the hex. So for example, if I rolled a 7 and placed the robber here, I could choose to steal a random resource from either blue or orange. In the future, if the number that the robber occupies is rolled, that resource is blocked from those players built on that hex. So in this example, if a 3 was rolled, then blue and orange wouldn't be able to get an OR resource card. Lastly, if a player has more than 7 cards, they must select half of their resource cards to return to the bank. If you have an odd number of cards, you will round down the amount of cards you must discard. So in this example, with my 9 cards, I would take 4 and return them to the bank. After rolling, you may trade resource cards with other players and or use maritime trading. When doing domestic trading, you negotiate the terms of the trade. You may trade as many times as you like during your turn, but you can't give away cards or trade matching resources. When doing maritime trade, you can always trade 4 of one resource for a resource of your choice. If you have a settlement or a city on a harbor, which are these, located around the board, you can trade with the bank at either a 3 of a single resource for a resource card of your choice, or a 2-for-1, trading the resource that is depicted. The last thing you can do on your turn is build roads, settlements, cities, or buy development card. The cost of roads, settlements, cities, and development cards can be found on your building cost card. Building can increase your victory points, expand your road network, and improve your resource production. To build, you will simply pay the cost to the bank and then place your road, settlement, or city down. A new road must always connect to one of your existing roads, settlements, or cities. So if I wanted to build a new settlement, I could build a road here, paying 1 brick and 1 wood to the bank. And now I can build a settlement here, paying 1 grain, wool, brick, and lumber to the bank. The first player to build a continuous road of at least 5 road segments receives the longest road card, worth 2 victory points. If another player builds a road longer than the player with the longest road card, they immediately take the longest road card. So if I built a road here, that would make my road 6 long, meaning I would take the longest road from white. Settlements must connect to at least one of your roads. You can't build it in the middle of nowhere. Each settlement is worth 1 victory point. Cities are an upgrade to a settlement. When you upgrade a settlement to a city, you put the settlement piece back in your supply and replace it with a city. Cities produce twice as many resources as settlements. When a number is rolled that a city is built on, the player takes 2 of that resource. Each city is worth 2 victory points. Last is development cards, which come in 3 categories: Knight, Progress, and Victory Point. Knights have a purple frame and allow you to move the robber and steal a resource from a player built on the hex you blocked, just like when a 7 is rolled. Once played, knight cards remain face up in front of you. The first player to have 3 knight cards in front of themselves gets the largest army card, worth 2 victory points. Just like Longest Road, if another player has more knight cards in front of them than the player with the largest army card, they immediately take the largest army card. Progress cards have a green frame. There are 3 types of progress cards: road building, which allows you to place 2 free roads; Year of Plenty, which allows you to take any 2 resource cards from the supply, which you may use that turn; and Monopoly, which allows you to take all of one resource type from the other players. Victory point cards have an orange frame and give you 1 victory point. Development cards can be played at any time during your turn, even before you roll the dice, but you may not play a development card that was purchased that round unless you had 9 victory points and the development card you just purchased is a victory point card, in which case you can play it in front of you, ending the game. Players take turns rolling the 2 dice, acquiring any resources from settlements and cities that are built on hexes that correspond to the dice number, trade, and build. This continues until a player receives 10 victory points. Now you're ready to settle the island of Catan. If you like this video, then consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing so you don't miss out on future uploads. If you want to recommend a game for a future video, head over to my Patreon. There, patrons can participate in the weekly poll. Patrons can also get early access to my videos or get a shout out in future videos.